Now, for the last 2 hours, we've been talking about spotlight on improving academic achievement, and Radio New Zealand already deciding that they would employ people they knew, or at least the journalists knew, to show that the idea of learning the basics is wrong, and that the government's moves are somehow injurious of the public good. And how they manipulated a news story, basically to employ people or get people on they knew who come from a particular political bent. And this is sort of representative of Radio New Zealand News this day. I've got to tell you, though, the reason that you should get upset every day on this issue is because it's paid for by the New Zealand taxpayer, Radio New Zealand News. It's not the platform. It's not News Talk ZB. It's not even Stuff, which at least you can say, or the Otago Day Times, at least you can say those news media outlets or News Hub are privately funded. And if they've got a particular political bent, that's all right. You don't have to listen to them. But Radio New Zealand, which you may choose not to listen to as well because you expect it to be a lefty liberal paradise of people who are polemic in outlook and philosophical in nature, but we're paying for that. And I don't get it. When is some government going to bite the bullet and say, we're not funding Radio New Zealand or Television New Zealand anymore? We're going to sell them. I don't know if anybody would buy Radio New Zealand. They might. Radio New Zealand's got no advertisements. It's a non-commercial, lefty liberal haven for the woke, funded by 5.4 million New Zealanders. Why? How does that make sense? Ditto, the concert program. Why am I funding a bunch of highbrows who can generally afford to listen to their own radios or their own station and pay for it? Why are we funding the concert program? For God's sake. So they can play classical music to classical music and opera enthusiasts. Fine. Have your own radio station. Cool. Let it pay for itself. Why are they sponging off us? Don't get it. Do not get it. Think it's wrong. Always thought it's wrong. And you know, tell you who was right on this one was David Longy. David Longy said, why am I funding Debussy? But I'm not, and Dvorak, but I'm not funding Dire Straits. He said, I don't get it. Well, you know, and he was making the point then. This is back in 1985, 1986, and there was a plethora of people who said, oh, you know, mostly elderly, mostly well endowed, mostly wealthy, who said, no, you can't take away our thing. And I'm going, well, you can afford to pay for it. I don't get state funding for the New Zealand Opera. I loathe opera, but just put that to one side. I don't have my musical taste funded by the New Zealand taxpayer. The New Zealand Symphony Orchestra. There's another one. The New Zealand Ballet School. What? Why are these things funded at all? Why can't they pay for themselves? If they can't pay for themselves, they shouldn't exist. It's really simple. It was a good time to bring on, actually, former ACT MP and Regional Councillor, City Councillor, businesswoman and lawyer Hilary Calvert joins us on the show. Why? Why are we funding Radio New Zealand News if they are just a party political broadcast for probably the Greens?
Yeah. I've got a couple of suggestions. What you could do with some of them is to put them onto a sort of a rolling, you won't need producers or anything else, just a rolling stream of classical music. Very cheap. Or use the model of whatever it is that Radio Rumour uses.
Oh, yeah, I know what you mean. So you're just saying it's like these 24-hour music stations and you got a few sort of ads in between and you program them and you just run them during a day. Yeah.
Yeah, or
but like
whatever.
More FM, I think they run that way, or they used to run that way. Yeah.
Yeah, and another way of approaching it would be to say, if some people think these are nice to haves, as they might say, why don't we start by looking at the things we know we need? like health, education, stuff that the government ought to be doing.
Mm-hmm.
And then just work your way down. So it may be that the symphony orchestra comes in at number 76 or something.
Yeah.
And we've got lots of money at the moment. We've just discovered electricity off the coast, because it wouldn't be oil anymore, would it? Electricity off the coast or something. Suddenly got a whole lot of money. We get to number 76 and we fund it. Other years, we only get to number 5 and we're struggling with funding that. And so all the other ones, so you can argue then about whether the ballet should be 47 or symphony orchestra should be 65 or something on the list.
Mm. Mm. No, I see your point. So you'd just sort of say, well, we're a poor country now. We could only fund the first 40. After this, sorry, but we've got to fund it here.
Yeah, and then you could stand for election saying, I want to double your taxes because I want to add another 30 down the list of the things I would like to fund.
I've never got the funding of Radio New Zealand and Television New Zealand. I don't understand why we don't sell TVNZ. Nobody watches it anymore anyhow. But I'm sure it must be able to have a business model that makes it. But it's utterly reliant upon that subsidy to make Television New Zealand works. And yet they're in the commercial field competing against other television stations. I don't get it. We're subsidising them to do so.
Yes, it doesn't make sense to me. Increasingly too, I've noticed that things that they probably don't think of as ads, but, like telling you a program's coming up or whatever, they've started to, and I noticed that particularly on TV3 and on Radio New Zealand, which of course is a separate approach, people talking about themselves, journalists, like there's a couple on TV3 who just say, aren't we a great team, we're working well together, we're just fabulous, and we're looking forward to a new year and things. And you're thinking, if you're a journalist, it's not about you. Shut up. So there's this little love fest going on with announcers and people on TV as if it's all about...
Yes, I know what you mean. So the newsreader, for example, on TV1, Hilary, will go to their reporter on the field who'll then... She's now the resident expert, and she'll not just report, she probably won't report what's happened, but she'll tell you what her view of what it should be, and then goes back to the newsreader again. You're right, it's TVNZ, interviewing TVNZ as to, I'm not going to give you the facts so you can make up your mind, I'm going to interpret the facts and give my opinion, and you're going to get that instead. Yes,
and so they think that they're the arbiters of their viewers, the world view or something. And it's unhelpful. If
and
you want
subsidised by you and I. Yeah, and that's the thing that infuriates me. If they want to go and be a Sky News or a CNN or what other ones out there, Al Jazeera or RT News or whatever, go run your show. Good on you. Go and make it work yourself. But no, there you go. Hey, just on that this morning, you would have caught up with the fact that James Shaw is resigning as co-leader of the Green Party, and after he loses his chaotic or quixotic, depending on which way you attempt at some private member's bill, will then resign from Parliament. I said that I thought he was probably the only sane one. Is that your view, or do you have a different one?
He's usually if they've had a sort of a boy and a girl, which they have had to have, they no longer have to have, a Maori and a non-Maori, a economic, sort of somebody who can get on with the government, as it were, and somebody who's just out there where the buses don't run, often in the socialist, communist, sort of pink part of the watermelon. He's he spent 20 years, I think, is it, or whatever, in London being a business person, and he's would rather be in the tent pissing out than outside the tent pissing in. But the result of that has been, I think, quite interesting, because apart from him having a ministerial position, his life is spent on a diet of dead rats, or it has been with the Labour government. If he thinks he's achieved anything, I can't think what it is.
No, he'd have difficulty being able to say what he had achieved. You're correct. And he's along for the ride. But I guess that's the nature of being a small party in his particular position. I mean, he's got to deal with fundamental reality, doesn't he? So he can either be outside.
Well, I don't know. No,
raging.
I don't think that's fair. Look at what David Seymour's doing at the moment.
Yeah, but he's got himself into a position where he's needed. The Greens, Labor didn't need the Greens last time, and New Zealand First, they needed New Zealand First, but they didn't need the Greens last time either. So he was sort of like on the periphery looking in. He was like that small boy, looking in from the outside at everybody dining at the table.
He told people he was doing something useful, and he said he thought he was doing something useful and whatever.
Well, I guess now in opposition, he knows he's not going to be, doesn't he? He's probably going to be smart enough to realise he's going to be in opposition for 6 years raging.
Yeah.